UFOs, unidentified flying objects. What are they? Where do they come from? Why are they here? Since the written word first appeared about 3000 BC, reports of spectacular and terrifying objects in the sky have been recorded by many civilizations throughout the ages. Before the flood in 4000 BC, Sumeria was known as the land of the civilized kings and flourished in Mesopotamia, in what is now modern-day Iraq. This advanced civilization had its own system of elaborate language and writing, architecture and arts, astronomy and mathematics. Their religious system was a complex one, comprised of hundreds of gods, rituals, and cosmology. According to the ancient texts, each Sumerian city was guarded by its own god, and while humans and gods used to live together, the humans were servants to the gods. Notice how the statues and depictions of these gods possess reptilian heads and other animal-like features. According to some UFO researchers, these alleged gods also interbred with humans and took the early Sumerian kings to the stars. Sumerian technology was highly developed, including astronomy, and they believed that their gods were from Mars, the star system Pleiades, and the star Sirius. But what were these strange beings? This is a question we will return to later in this documentary. After the flood of Noah in 2348 BC, the descendants of his three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, began to repopulate the world. The descendants of Japheth, a philosopher who possessed a vast intellect, spread out across East Asia and became the Asian races of China, Japan, Korea, Mongolia, and the Philippines. The most industrious of these, the Chinese, began to quickly drain the land of the remaining flood waters, plant rice fields, build walled cities, develop an intricate written language, and became inventors, philosophers, naval explorers, and global traders. The Chinese were among the first people to record what we would call UFOs today. In the book Memories of the Sovereigns and the Kings, published in the 3rd millennium BC, suns from the sky would descend to Earth on a star which was the shape of a saucer. The ancient Egyptians were also witness to strange flying objects. In the collections of the Vatican Egyptian Museum in Rome is an ancient papyrus written around 1500 BC. The pharaoh of that period, Thutmose III, who many believe to have been the pharaoh of the Exodus, witnessed several flying discs that terrified him and all who saw them, including most of his army. Pharaoh later instructed his scribes to record the strange events. The Thule Papyrus narrated a series of sightings of mysterious objects in the sky as seen by Pharaoh Thutmose III and many of his subjects. The papyrus contained many deletions, as did the original document, and in crucial parts of the text. These deletions seemed deliberate, almost as an attempt to make the incident incomprehensible. In 329 BC, before the rise of Imperial Rome, Alexander the Great recorded 2 giant silver shields that dived repeatedly at his army as they attempted a river crossing in Central Asia. The action so panicked his elephants, horses, and men they had to abandon the river crossing until the following day. Later in history, the Romans also observed strange aerial objects, as reported by Titus Livius, otherwise known as Livy, including a spectacle of ships was observed gleaming in the sky in the winter of 218 BC. There were many witnesses. Livy noted that many marvels were observed in several places in Italy. The following year, many Romans observed what looked like a group of shiny round shields in the sky. The objects appeared to be made from polished bronze. Even the Aboriginal people of Australia recorded sky gods in their mythology. The Wandjina were cloud and rain spirits who, during the dream time, created or influenced the landscape and its inhabitants. These images from Kimberley, Australia, are thousands of years old and represent beings that apparently visited the Aboriginals from another world. Notice the odd shape of some of the heads, which can be compared to the more familiar alien greys of today. As we journey through time to early Europe, strange flying objects were also observed, including a report concerning several wonderfully constructed aerial ships that appeared over Lyons, France, between 830 and 833 AD. These ships were witnessed by hundreds of people, a few of which were taken aboard the craft and were told by the crew that they were from a land in the sky called Magonia. Archbishop Agobard rescued and later interviewed a small group of abductees who were attacked by a frightened mob upon their return. In an ancient and obscure Irish manuscript titled Speculum Regali is an account of an encounter between some church attendees and a strange flying ship which occurred in 986 AD. The account recorded it thus. There happened in the borough of Cloria one Sunday, while the people were at Mass, a marvel. In this town is a church dedicated to Saint Canaris. It befell that an anchor was dropped from the sky, with a rope attached to it, and one of the flukes caught in the arch above the church door. The people rushed out of the church and saw in the sky a ship with men on board, floating before the anchor cable, and they saw a man leap overboard and jump down to the anchor as if to release it. He looked as if he was swimming in water. The folk rushed up and tried to seize him, but the bishop forbade the people to hold the man, for it might kill him. The man was freed and hurried up to the ship, where the crew cut the rope and the ship sailed out of sight. But the anchor is in the church, and has been there ever since as a testimony. On April 4th, 1561, the residents of Nuremberg, Germany, witnessed spectacular displays of spheres, discs, and tubes zooming around the sky and engaging in an aerial ballet for over an hour. Some of the objects even crashed. Artist Hans Glaser produced this woodcut of the event. As a result of religious interpretation, fuselages and wings were depicted as crosses, and rockets became tubes full of balls. Two immense black cylinders launching many blue and black spheres, blood-red crosses, and flying discs. The objects battled one another in the sky, and some of these spheres and objects even crashed outside the city. One spectacular and terrifying sight continued to be observed. Such spectacular and terrifying sights continued to be observed in Europe, such as this account of flying spheres in Switzerland. Between 1561 and 1566, residents of Basel, Switzerland, witnessed spectacular displays of spheres, discs, and tubes zooming about the sky and engaging in an aerial combat. On August 7th, 1566, at dawn, many citizens of Basel, Switzerland, were frightened and observed during several hours the black spheres involved in a formidable aerial battle invading the sky of their city. At the time when the sun rose, one saw many large black balls which moved at high speed in the air towards the sun, then made half-turns, banging against one another as if they were fighting in a battle out of combat. A great number of them became red, therefore they were consumed and died out. This account was written by Samuel Cosius, a student in crowned writings and liberal arts, who consigned the strange events in the city's gazette. Spectacular aerial objects were soon to make their appearance in the British colony of North America. In 1639, America's first UFO was sighted over the Charles River in Boston. Lights sped back and forth across the Charles River from Back Bay Fens to Charlestown. Governor John Winthrop made an entry in his journal regarding this strange event. The primary witness was described as a man of good reputation, activity, and estate in Boston. Winthrop wrote, "In this year, one James Everell, a sober, discreet man, and 2 others, saw a great light in the night at Muddy River. When it stood still, it flamed up, and was about 3 yards square. When it ran, it was contracted into the figure of a swine. It ran as swift as an arrow toward Charlestown, and so up and down for about 2 or 3 hours. The men were come down in their lighter about a mile, and when it was over, they found themselves carried quite back against the tide to the place they came from. Divers other credible persons saw the same light, after and about the same place." Little else was heard of strange flying objects until the late 19th century. The year of 1896 was marked by strange occurrences. People by the thousands living across North America, from San Francisco to Chicago, even to Winnipeg in Canada, observed strange lights in the sky. While the country watched, the lights, reportedly an airship, crossed the continent from west to east at remarkable speed. The excitement started on November 17, 1896, in Sacramento, California. It was a rainy, dismal night. Then, through the dark clouds, appeared a bright light. It moved slowly west, appearing to be about 1,000 feet above the rooftops. Hundreds of people saw the light, including George Scott, an assistant to the Secretary of State of California. Scott persuaded some friends to join him on the observation deck above the Capitol dome, and from there they thought they could see 3 lights. Above the lights was a dark oblong shape. Enormous wings and sometimes propellers were also observed on the fast-moving craft. A few astonished witnesses even reported encounters with the crew members and pilots of the mystery airships when the vessels were on the ground. Although the occupants often appeared to be human, their behavior, mannerisms, and clothing were unusual. On one occasion, the pilots claimed to be from the planet Mars, while 1 or 2 others claimed to be from another continent. The last of these sensational flying craft was observed in Aurora, Texas, in April 1897, before disappearing completely, much to the dismay of newspaper editors across the country, who no doubt rejoiced in the record sales of their tabloids. The first person to make an engine-powered flight was Frenchman Henry Giffard in 1852. Giffard flew 17 miles from Paris to Trappes in a steam-powered airship of his own design. However, his efforts could not match the speed and maneuverability of the phantom airships that appeared across the United States and on at least one occasion in Canada. During World War II, Allied bomber crews flying missions over Germany were regularly paced by brightly lit flying objects. The bomber crews labeled these lights as Foo Fighters, Foo being the French word for fire. At the end of the war, military intelligence officers on both sides thought that the other side were responsible for the strange lights, and rumors have since persisted to the present day that the Third Reich were experimenting with advanced flying discs that were far superior to Allied aircraft. but no solid evidence was ever produced to prove this theory. It is generally considered among UFO researchers that the modern age of the flying saucer began in June 1947, when businessman Kenneth Arnold claimed to have seen a group of 9 high-speed objects near Mount Rainier in Washington while flying his small plane. Arnold estimated the speed of the crescent-shaped objects at around 1,200 miles per hour and said they moved like saucers skipping on water. In the newspapers that followed, it was mistakenly stated that the objects were saucer-shaped, and the term flying saucer was born. It would have been easy to dismiss Arnold as a crackpot until 2 more sensational cases involving so-called flying saucers worried the nation. On the 7th of January 1948, Godman Airfield at Fort Knox, Kentucky, received a report from the Kentucky Highway Patrol that a large circular object, at least 250 feet in diameter, was slowly moving west. At about 1:45 p.m., Sergeant Quinton Blackwell saw an odd aerial object from the control tower at Fort Knox, and the base commander, Colonel Guy Hicks, reported an object through his binoculars as being a very white object, about 1/4 the size of the full moon, and appeared to have had a red border at the bottom. Other observers at the Clinton County Army Airfield in Ohio also observed the slow-moving object for about 35 minutes, stating that it came very near the ground, stayed down for about 10 seconds, then climbed at a very fast rate back to its original altitude of 10,000 feet, leveling off and disappearing into the overcast weather heading of 120 degrees. Its speed was greater than 500 miles per hour in level flight. 4 P-51 Mustangs of Sea Flight, 165th Fighter Squadron, Kentucky Air National Guard, were already in the air. The flight leader, Captain Thomas Mantell, was instructed to investigate the object. One Mustang was low on fuel and abandoned the attempted interception. The remaining 2 pilots accompanied Mantell in steep pursuit of the object. They later reported that they saw an object, but it was too far away to be positively identified. Only one of the P-51s, piloted by Lieutenant Albert Clemens, had oxygen, which was running low. Clemens and another pilot, Lieutenant B.A. Hammond, called off their pursuit at 22,500 feet, but Mantell attempted to close in on the object. According to the Air Force, once Mantell passed 25,000 feet, he would have blacked out from the lack of oxygen. Failing to close in on the object, Mantell's plane began spiraling down back towards the ground. A witness later reported observing Mantell's aircraft plummeting in a circling descent. His plane crashed at a farm south of Franklin, Kentucky, with Captain Mantell still strapped to his seat. The UFO was no longer visible to observers at Godman Airfield. The Mantell incident was reported by newspapers across the country and received significant international attention. A number of sensational rumors claimed that Mantell's fighter had been shot down by the UFO that he was chasing, and that the Air Force covered up the evidence proving this. Another rumor stated that Mantell's body was riddled with strange holes. However, no evidence has ever surfaced to substantiate any of these claims. At the time of Captain Mantell's pursuit of the alleged UFO, the United States Navy had released several top-secret skyhook balloons in Clinton County, Ohio, on the same day. The balloons were made of reflective aluminum and were about 100 feet in diameter, consistent with the description of the UFO as large, metallic, and cone-shaped. As the Skyhook project was top secret at that time, it is unlikely that Captain Mantell or any members of his flight or the air traffic control staff at Godman Air Base would have known anything about them. The 1950s proved an interesting decade for the UFO phenomenon, and reports started to reach the public thick and fast. The first encounter happened on May 29, 1950, and involved an American Airlines DC-6 piloted by Captain Willis T. Sperry.
What is your full name, Captain?
Captain Willis Sperry.
How long with American Airlines?
17 years.
Well, what was the date of sighting?
May the 29th, 1950.
And the time of sighting?
9:30 in the evening.
The origin of sighting?
60 miles southwest of Washington, D.C.
And the destination?
Nashville, Tennessee.
What was the visibility?
It was unlimited.
And what was your altitude?
7,500 feet.
Who of the crew first saw the object?
The co-pilot called it to my attention as I had turned to reach for a map. The object was flying head-on at us. It was 50 times the magnitude of the brightest star. I immediately made an abrupt turn to avoid collision. As I looked to my left, the object appeared to come to a stop.
Can you describe the shape of the object?
It appeared as a perfectly streamlined object without wings or tail section, as it was silhouetted against the full moon. At all times, it had a brilliant, shimmering blue light in the nose. It was traveling at fantastic speed, and although it had passed off our left wingtip, it circled us in a matter of seconds and appeared off our right wing. There again, it stopped, and we watched it for several seconds. When again it started, it reversed its direction. We watched it for several more seconds until it disappeared in the east out of sight.
Have you ever seen any other similar object, Captain?
Never before or since.
2 years later, a more troubling case caused an even bigger sensation in the nation. From July 12th to July 29th, 1952, a series of unidentified lights were observed over Washington, D.C. At 11:40 p.m. on Saturday, July 19th, Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at the Washington National Airport, now known as the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, observed 7 objects on his radar. The objects were located 15 miles south-southwest of the city. No known aircraft were in the area at that time, and the objects were not following any established flight path. Nugent's superior, Harry Barnes, a senior air traffic controller at the airport, watched the objects on Nugent's radar scope. At 3 a.m., shortly before 2 jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington, all of the objects vanished from the radar at National Airport. However, when the jets ran low on fuel and left, the objects returned, which convinced Barnes that the UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly. The objects were last detected by radar at 5:30 a.m. Around sunrise, E.W. Chambers, a civilian radio engineer in Washington suburbs, observed 5 huge disks circling in a loose formation until they tilted upwards and left on a steep descent. No satisfactory explanation was ever given for these unsettling events.
Washington Control to Red Dog 1. Can you see anything on either side or to the front of you? Over.
Red Dog 1 to Washington Control. Can't see anything. Wait a minute. I see 'em. Yeah, I see 'em. They're all around me. They're moving in on me. They're coming closer. They're coming closer. coming right at me. Hold it. They're moving off. I'm at maximum speed. They're going away. They're gone. I can't see them. Red Dog 1 to Washington Control. I've been given permission to return to base. Over.
In Great Britain, the Royal Air Force would regularly scramble its fighters to intercept unidentified flying objects that could easily outpace and outmaneuver the jets while avoiding their machine gun fire. Yet most Western governments denied the existence of any potential aerial threat from another world, even though a few of them were secretly studying the phenomenon. From the 1950s onwards, countless amazing reports of strange flying objects, not all shaped like saucers, were observed by ordinary members of the public, from schoolteachers to police officers, ministers of religion, military personnel, and even politicians, including former United States presidents Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. From 1952 to 1970, the United States Air Force established Project Blue Book, which was one of a series of systematic studies of UFOs. The Air Force provided the following summary of its investigations. Number 1. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. Number 2. There was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. And finally, Number 3. And there was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. Project Blue Book's findings were accepted by mainstream scientists, but were viewed with suspicion by many ordinary Americans who felt that their government was unwilling to reveal what they really knew about UFOs. Over 95% of all UFO sightings, according to Project Blue Book, were misidentifications of known phenomenon like planets such as Venus, misidentified aircraft, odd cloud formations, flocks of birds, and so on. But this still left about 5% of sightings and encounters with UFOs that remain unexplained. These were labeled as residual UFOs or RUFOs. Curiously, on September the 21st, 1987, President Ronald Reagan gave an address to the United Nations General Assembly. In an oft-quoted section of his speech, Reagan asked rhetorical questions and commented about the nations and cultures of the world uniting in a common effort if faced with an alien threat from outside the Earth.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
By the 1990s, more people across the world had access to digital cameras and cell phones that could take photographs and record video footage. With the advent of the internet and the introduction of popular social media websites like YouTube, people began to share their own video footage and photographs of alleged UFOs. Some were clever fakes, while others appeared to be genuine. The following reports, collected from various news agencies and ordinary citizens around the world, reveal that something very strange indeed is going on in our skies.
Residents are on edge this morning after another apparent UFO sighting. It's the second one in 2 weeks. The first sighting was on July 7th, and an airport had to be shut down.
All right, that's a UFO if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, can you identify it?
That's undeniable.
The airport had to be shut down after people apparently saw twinkling lights above the airport terminal. 17 flights had to be diverted. The latest sighting happened just 2 days ago, and people say they saw 4 lantern-like objects forming a diamond shape in the air, hovering in the sky for over an hour. And aviation experts say they don't know what it was. It wasn't a plane.
Scientists from all over the world are trying to figure out what caused a mysterious blue light to spiral in the sky over Norway on Wednesday.
As UFO sightings go, this one was as good or as weird as it gets.
A light appearing high in the Arctic sky, baffling those who saw it and exciting a lot of comment.
Tonight, Norwegian authorities are investigating strange lights seen in the Arctic sky. The spiraling white light was seen for several minutes Wednesday morning. Locals say the light appeared to be bigger than the moon. Thousands of Norwegians bombarded the Meteorological Institute to ask what that light could have possibly been. Some feared it could have been a meteor, others a black hole, and there are even those that thought it could be aliens.
A strange spiralling white light was spotted in the early morning sky over Sydney, with even sceptical witnesses wondering if it was a UFO. The unusual sight was recorded by hundreds of people from Victoria north to Queensland.
A spiral in the sky around a bright light.
Scientists left baffled by an unexplained circular light seen hovering high over Moscow on Wednesday evening. People described seeing a wide circular formation in the sky. Footage capturing the spectacle will help whether scientists and specialists find an explanation for the event.
There's a new video this morning that some say may be proof we're not alone in the universe. A UFO in the form of a bright light is seen descending over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. The video is said to be taken over the weekend. Then suddenly the light shoots up into the sky. There you see it. Another video from a different angle appears to show the light doing the same thing.
Now it is sparking intense debate on the internet. Trace Gallagher following this live from our West Coast News. So the question is, what was that UFO? What was it doing over Jerusalem? And, is he back?
Yeah, and that is the question, by the way, Megan, because, critics, it's difficult for them to dismiss this because there are so many different angles. We've got 4 different videos, all from various perspectives, but they do not know of anything like this in the Israeli army.
All right, because listen, I don't like to be scared. I just can't take it. It's, I don't know what it is.
Well, I wish I could give you an answer to this bizarre sighting. I really can't, but I can tell you that earlier today, there were dozens and dozens of people right here on 23rd and 8th. They were standing right here, and they were all in a stupor, just crowded together, looking into the sky.
Well, a lot of people are looking up. It's because of a mystery in the sky. Is it a balloon, a UFO? Whatever it is, it sure has a lot of people talking.
And a Navy pilot sees an unidentified flying object. Why he insists it is, quote, not from this world. Let's go out front. Close encounter with a possible UFO? The Navy pilot who had one says this mysterious craft outran his F-18 supersonic jet. He'll be my guest. Out front tonight, a stunning claim from the man who ran the Defense Department's multi-million-dollar UFO program, a top-secret operation that was, for years, dedicated to, yes, investigating UFO sightings. Aaron spoke to him, and when asked, does he believe there is alien life out there, this was his response.
My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
Now, this video you are seeing here is presented as possible evidence. It was captured by a U.S. Navy fighter jet in 2004 off the coast of California. If you look closely, It appears to show a whitish oval object about the size of a commercial airplane hovering over the ocean. What is it exactly? Out front now, the man who witnessed this object. He's a retired U.S. Navy pilot, Commander David Fravor. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Commander, you were in the cockpit there. Explain to us exactly what you saw.
Yeah, when there was two of us, two airplanes, four people. We had F-18Fs. We had got vectored out to the west after they terminated a training exercise to investigate an object. When we arrived, the cruiser with the Aegis system told us it was merge plot, which means they couldn't break us out from the blip. We started looking around, and as we both looked out the right side of our airplane, we saw a disturbance in the water, i.e. like a seamount where the waves are breaking over the top, so white water, and a white object, oblong, pointing north, moving erratically left, right, north, south, up, down, all around. As we started a clockwise flow around the disturbance, watching it, I decided that I would go lower and the other jet stayed high to observe both of us. As I got to about the 12 o'clock position, the object started to mirror us, so now we're both in a clockwise flow, opposite circles. The object is lower than me, I'm above him, and I'm looking at him with my eyes. We get all the way around the circle as I'm descending, so now there's probably about maybe a 2,000 to 3,000 foot difference between us in vertical. And I'm at about the 8 o'clock position, and the tic-tac is at about 2. I cut across the circle, so across the middle, and as I got close to it, probably within a mile to a half mile, it rapidly accelerated to the south and disappeared in less than 2 seconds. So then we turned back around. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I mean, I guess you're an experienced pilot. You've been up in the air a lot. I imagine you've seen a lot of things in the sky. What was it about the movement of this or the appearance of this that made you believe it wasn't from this world as opposed to something else?
Well, the first thing is it had no wings, so you think, okay, it's a helicopter. Well, there's no rotor wash in the water. There's no rotors. And when helicopters move side to side, they kind of slow and then they pick up speed going the other way. This was extremely abrupt, like a ping pong ball bouncing off a wall. It would hit and go the other way and change directions at will. And then the ability to hover over the water and then start a vertical climb from basically 0 up towards about 12,000 feet and then accelerate in less than 2 seconds and disappear is something I had never seen in my life.
Now listen, I'm sure you've spoken to people, you told the story to some people who react with skepticism, shake their heads a bit. Yes. What do you say to people who doubt the account?
Well, I think it's easy to doubt what we can't explain, but when you actually see things, and this is not the first account of someone seeing a UFO, but in this situation, you're talking about 4 people, all eyeballs on, ranging in experience from relatively new in a fleet squadron, which is VFA 41, to myself, who had over 16 years of flying and well over 3,500 hours nonstop. So I would argue that it wasn't a weather balloon, it wasn't a flare, it was an actual object that we looked at for somewhere around 5 minutes before it rapidly accelerated.
Now, the Defense Department analyzed this video. Did they take it seriously? Did they come to any conclusion?
Well, you can't really discern what it is until there's a couple of shots. When it gets close, there's a couple of objects coming out of the bottom. But you can estimate on how fast it leaves the side of that screen and the width, and you know, you'd have to ask exactly based on the field of view what they would estimate that is. But when it leaves the screen on the video, it's moving pretty fast.
Commander Fravor,
and that's from a standstill.
A remarkable account. Thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you.
Police officers are not exempt from observing UFOs. In one incident, which occurred in June 2008, a police helicopter patrolling the skies above the coastal city of Brighton, England, observed an odd, tube-like flying object which was invisible to their radar, but visible to the pilot and his colleague. Here we let Sergeant John Tickner take up the story.
Puzzled really as to what it could be in our airspace. We're not used to seeing too many other airborne things over Brighton. Normally it's just us.
As soon as I saw the object out of the window, I identified it to the pilot, because obviously we're concerned about other aircraft flying in our airspace, particularly at night time and at that low level. We then manoeuvred the aircraft so that we could capture it on the film and the infrared camera and do our best to identify what it was. I never imagined it was going to be little green men, although we did share a little joke about it at the time and talk about waving. In fact, we decided we waited just in case it was.
On Friday, March 5, 2004, Mexican Air Force pilots filmed 11 unidentified flying objects in the skies over southern Campeche state, but the public was not notified of the sightings until Mexico's Defense Department issued a statement on May 12th. A press release was accompanied by a videotape that showed some bright objects flying parallel to the surveillance aircraft that was on the lookout for drug smuggling aircraft. The lights, which were invisible to the aircrew, were filmed by using infrared equipment at an altitude of 11,500 feet.
A las 7, a la misma altura.
Hay unas nubes ahí, se debe de ver esto.
Pero, a ver, busquen eso que viene atrás de nosotros.
Ve cómo se ve como en dos fotos. Viene como a las 7, 8 de la posición. Lo raro es que trae una punta adelante. Un puntito adelante.
A ver, ¿qué tenemos?
Nada, señor. A ver, permítame, déjale busco.
¿Y nosotros?
Comandante, ¿qué es eso?
¿Qué distancia más o menos lo tenías, Telles? Oye, a ver, abusados, es como...
Ahí van más. Van más, siguen más atrás. Son 10, 11 objetos.
Son muchos objetos.
Afirmativo. Ahí van. Va, uno. Y ahí van los atrás. Siguientes.
¿Qué es eso, Dios mío?
¿Se anda correteando?
¿Qué es eso? A ver, trata de enfocar.
Máximo.
Ok, no dejes que los dejes atrás. Ok.
Van.
Sigue ese, no lo dejes,
No, van todos, van aproximadamente como 10,
como
¿ya lo dio?
4.
¿Ya lo dio? Y van pasando.
Tú van a no lo cierres.
Sí. Ahí van.
3, 4, 5, 6. Son 6. ¿Abajo o arriba o arriba?
En medio, ahí van.
Ahí van a ir 1, 2, 3,
a la misma
4,
altura.
5. ¡Qué barbaridad,
Ahí se van a ver bien. Y van a una velocidad, pero... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 en la pantalla.
Síguelo, no lo cierras.
¿Están a la misma altura, Telles? Afirmativo.
Poquito, arriba.
8, 9, 10, 11 contando toda la cola. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11.
Ok, no sabemos qué estamos viendo, son unos objetos nada más luminosos que vienen a la misma altura que nosotros, pero no podemos saber qué distancia. ¿Por qué nos vienen siguiendo?
In June 2010, this civilian air traffic control radar in Yakutsk, Russia, was filmed when tracking a UFO. The radar system gives it speed at over 6,000 miles per hour, at an altitude of over 12 miles. The object is also changing direction instantly, which is almost impossible for any modern aircraft. Note how fast the UFO is traveling compared to other aircraft on the screen. The object has not sent any identification signal to the Secondary Surveillance Radar, or SSR, and the system has tagged the UFO with the default number of 5 zeros.
Ну, сейчас отлично. Отлично. А то там просто бурчание и накладывается какая-то другая связь. Не нарушено. Понял. Аэрофлот 825 правильно, точки доложить 134,3, 11-100. Невозможно понять. Сейчас невозможно. 85704 Якутск.
60 years before the first widely reported alien abduction, Colonel H.G. Shaw claimed that he and a friend, Camilla Spooner, were confronted by 3 tall, slender humanoids whose bodies were covered with a fine, downy hair. The beings tried to abduct Shaw and his friend, who were able to fight them off. The beings then floated upward towards a large, oblong or cigar-shaped object, which then moved silently away. This account was published in the Stockton, California Daily Mail in 1897, and may have been linked to the mystery airships of the late 19th century that were observed in several locations in the United States and Canada. Since the 1950s, more than 4 million Americans claim to have been abducted by aliens, and many more people around the world have made identical claims. But since we cannot examine all of them, we will highlight the 3 most famous so-called abduction cases. The most widely publicized case of direct contact with alleged occupants of flying saucers began in 1952, when a Polish-born American citizen called George Adamski claimed to have met a being from Venus called Orthon. The unwitnessed meeting took place in the Colorado desert when Orthon exited a scout ship made of a type of translucent metal. Adamski communicated with Orthon through telepathy and hand signals, but was not allowed to photograph him. During their conversation, Orthon allegedly warned Adamski of the dangers of atomic war and even arranged for Adamski to be taken on a trip to see the solar system, including the planet Venus. Adamski claimed several meetings with slender, attractive blonde aliens that modern-day ufologists called Nordics. In addition to his trips around the solar system, which occurred from 1962 to 1965, Adamski allegedly visited Venus and Saturn. Adamski's book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, published in 1953, became a worldwide sensation. He traveled all over the world, delivering lectures and giving interviews to the media.
So I was picked up on a desert, in California desert, and I was taken to the mothership and I was flown around, not too close to the moon, but with instruments. Similar, you might say, except it wasn't a camera, it was a regular sort of a telescopic instruments that we were able to see what was on the moon.
In 1959, he had a personal audience with Queen Juliana of the Netherlands. And in 1963, he delivered a secret message from the Venusians to Pope John Paul XIII at Vatican City. Adamski later produced a solid gold medal, which he claimed was presented to him by the Pope in exchange for his service in delivering this secret message. George Adamski died in 1965 at the age of 74 from a heart attack. Whether his experiences were genuine or not, Adamski painted a soothing picture of gentle, physically attractive, and highly intelligent space beings who were deeply concerned about man's experiments in producing weapons of mass destruction. However, since Adamski's passing, millions of people worldwide have claimed to have had far more sinister and terrifying encounters with UFOs and their occupants. On September 19, 1961, at around 10:30 p.m., Betty and Barney Hill, a mixed-race couple from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, claimed to have been abducted by aliens who communicated with the couple before subjecting them to terrifying medical examinations. So what really happened to the Hills? As they were driving home from a vacation in Canada, Betty noticed a bright light in the sky as they drove along New Hampshire's seacoast, just south of Lancaster. Betty watched the light, thinking at first it was a falling star, except it moved upward like an aircraft. As the light grew larger and brighter, Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look, as well as to walk their dog, Delcy. After the Hills pulled to the side of the road, Barney took a closer look at the object through his binoculars. To his astonishment, Hill saw multicolored lights and rows of windows on a flat-shaped object, which now seemed to be moving towards him. As the object moved to within 100 feet of him, he could see human-like figures inside. Frightened, he ran back to his car, where Betty waited. They climbed inside and sped away. As the Hills drove along the isolated road, the object came even closer. The silent, illuminated craft moved erratically and bounced back and forth in the night sky, as though it was playing a game of cat and mouse with the couple. As they drove on, they began to hear a beeping sound, but saw nothing. Although they'd been driving only a couple of minutes, they suddenly found themselves 35 miles further along the road. Eventually, Betty and Barney finally arrived home safely and retired for the night. When Betty awoke the next day, she telephoned his sister Janet, who had seen a UFO some years before, and told her about the strange object they had seen. Janet urged Betty to call Pease Air Force Base and tell them what she and Barney had seen. After hearing Betty's report, Major Paul W. Henderson told her candidly, the UFO was confirmed by our radar. When the Hills started suffering from bad nightmares, they sought help from a psychiatrist, Dr. Benjamin Simon, who hypnotized them in order to find out the root cause of the nightmares. Under hypnosis, they both separately described how they were abducted by aliens and shown around a spacecraft before undergoing medical examinations. Betty also spoke of the origin of the aliens, who claimed to be from the Zeta Reticuli system, which was unknown to astronomers until its discovery in 1969. Although the Hills, a quiet and unassuming couple, did not seek any publicity concerning their encounter, they became media celebrities, and their story was adapted into the best-selling 1966 book, The Interrupted Journey, and in 1975, a television movie titled The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones as Barney and Estelle Parsons as Betty, was made. The following are short clips of the Hills recalling their experience while under hypnosis. Some viewers may find the following audio recordings disturbing.
We go deeper and deeper, deeper asleep, far asleep, deeper and deeper, fully relaxed, all muscles are relaxed, you're comfortable, relaxed. God, what is it? And I try to maintain control so Betty cannot tell I am scared. God, I'm scared. It's all right. You can go right on and experience it. And I walk out, and I walk across the road. There it is up there. Oh, God damn it! Calm down. Calm down, it's there, but you can see it, but it's not going to hurt you. Go on. Why doesn't it go away? Look at it. It doesn't matter. Calm. Not going to hurt you. Go on. He's telling you. And he's looking at me. What did he tell you? Stay there and keep looking. Just keep looking and stay there. And just keep looking. Just keep looking. Could you hear him tell you? Oh, I got to pull these binoculars away from my eyes. Because if I don't, I'll just keep staying there. Could you hear him tell you this? Oh, no, he didn't say it. You felt he said it. I know. You know he's up there, yeah. Just stay there, he's saying to me. All right. I'll think in my head, this pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength. All right. Pull them down. Run! Pull these binoculars down and run. God, if they for God, give me strength. I gotta get away. Oh, Betty! We gotta get away, Betty! All right. Calm down. I'm driving. I gotta get away. How could you be sure he was telling you this? Calm down, you're still asleep. Oh. How could you be sure he was telling you this? His eyes. I've never seen his eyes before. But you said they were friendly. You said they were friendly. Oh, no. Not the leaders. I said only...
The horror of Betty and Barney's experience effectively dispelled any notion of friendly, gentle space beings for them. Sadly, Barney Hill died from a cerebral hemorrhage on February 25, 1969, at the age of 46. Betty never remarried and died on October 17, 2004, at the age of 85. The Hills' cultural legacy includes movies, television shows, and books that all treated alien abductions as a plausible phenomenon. One of the most documented cases in ufology involved a Christian woman by the name of Betty Andreasson. Betty's first abduction occurred during her childhood and culminated with an abduction experience that involved her whole family. On the evening of January 25, 1967, Betty was in her kitchen at South Ashburnham, Massachusetts. Her 7 children, mother and father, were all gathered in the living room. At about 6:35 p.m., the house lights suddenly blinked out for a moment, frightening the children. This was immediately followed by a pulsating reddish-orange light that shone through the kitchen window. As Betty tried to calm her children, her father rushed to look out the kitchen window, where he saw a group of 5 strange-looking small creatures approaching the house in a hopping motion. The small, humanoid-looking creatures then entered the house by passing right through the front door. Each wore a coverall blue uniform adorned with a Sam Browne-type belt. Their hands had 3 digits, but were later gloved on the craft they arrived in. They also wore what appeared to be boots, and the entities floated rather than walked. Betty's state of fear immediately evaporated when she began to experience an overwhelming sense of friendship, rather than the hostility that the Hills had experienced 6 years earlier. When Betty expressed concern for her family's safety, the entities released her 11-year-old daughter Becky from her paralysis to assure Betty that she was unharmed. Betty was then taken outside and brought on board a small UFO resting on the side of a hill that sloped down into the backyard. The craft was about 20 feet in diameter and looked like 2 saucers, one inverted upon the other. The craft accelerated and apparently merged with a larger mother craft, in which Betty was subjected to a physical examination by strange equipment. She was given one test which caused her pain, but resulted in what she later described as a religious awakening. Returning home, Betty found that her family was still in a state of suspended animation, with one of the diminutive beings remaining with them. When the family were released from their trance, the aliens left. Betty had been hypnotized and told not to reveal any details of her experience. Though some of the details of her abduction were temporarily lost to her, some things she was able to recall. During her abduction, Betty became fearful and prayed for Jesus to help her. The leader of the aliens became surprised, even startled, and literally begged Betty to follow him as her interaction with them continued. Betty noticed that the aliens began to move more slowly, and the leader kept checking behind him to ensure that Betty was still following him. He later told Betty that they worshipped Jesus Christ. They claimed that the second coming would happen soon, and then they took Betty to a room where she talked to a tall being of brilliant light she would later call the One. This description of this particular being is remarkably similar to descriptions of the so-called being of light encountered by many in near-death experiences. Other abductees have told UFO investigators that their abductors emphasize that Jesus is merely an ascended master, while others claim to have actually met him, along with Buddha and other spiritual teachers of the past. In 1977, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, founder of the Center for UFO Studies, and a hypnotist, Raymond E. Fowler, conducted a series of tests and more than a dozen sessions with Betty Andreasson and her daughter Becky. They were both able to unravel what happened to their family that night in 1967. Betty also recovered memories about some incidents in 1944, 1949, and 1950. Eventually, the full investigation team into the Andreasson case included a solar physicist, an electronics engineer, an aerospace engineer, a telecommunications specialist, and a UFO investigator. Betty's case involved 20 months of investigation, during which time she was given a character reference check, 2 lie detector tests, a psychiatric review, and an excruciating 14 sessions of regressive hypnosis. The results of this inquiry were startling. Betty, along with her daughter, relived a detailed account of a UFO experience, agreeing on all the basic aspects. The results were published in a 528-page account, which stated that Betty and her daughter were sane individuals who sincerely believed all the details given to their statements. The Betty Andreasson abduction case is still being investigated and studied today. Many abductees, including both adults and children, speak of the sheer terror they have felt during their experiences, including severe physical pain they endured as the entities that abducted them inserted probes and other devices in their ears, noses, and even their genitalia and anal passages. Some abductees have spoken of seeing other people on board the UFOs being flailed or having blood drained from their bodies, and even human body parts being kept in containers. Often, the abductees are warned by their alien captors that they will meet the same fate if they do not cooperate. Still, other victims of these abductions speak of seeing bizarre creatures that look like hybrids of some kind. The aliens always tell their victims that these experiments are for their own good, but rarely explain why. According to the FBI's National Crime Investigation Center Missing Persons File, there are 88,040 active missing person records, of which juveniles under the age of 18 account for well over 33,700 of the records. Although we are not claiming that all missing persons in the USA or any other country are the result of alien abduction, the statistics are still nevertheless disturbing. Another phenomenon that is entrenched firmly in the world of UFOs is the enduring mystery of the so-called Men in Black. A 1997 movie of the same name, starring Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, was such a resounding success that 2 sequels followed in 2002 and 2012. The movies portray the Men in Black as agents of a secretive government agency that work with good aliens to fight bad aliens to protect the Earth. The characters also visit various people who have witnessed spectacular UFO activity, and erase their memories with a small handheld electronic device. But the behavior of the real Men in Black is far more unsettling for those who have encountered them in real life. Many witnesses who have seen UFOs, even those who have never spoken about their observations to anyone, have been quickly visited by these strange individuals. The description of the Men in Black throughout the decades remains virtually the same with few differences. They always dress in black suits, fedora hats, with white shirts and black ties and black shoes. They sometimes wear sunglasses. They often look almost like identical twins. They appear to have pale, almost plastic skin, with staring eyes and no eyebrows or eyelashes. Usually only one will do the talking, while the other will stare at the witness, making them feel uncomfortable. They sometimes move in an odd, robotic way. They are always associated with large black limousine cars and sometimes black SUVs. Witnesses claim that the Men in Black have visited their homes, possessed detailed knowledge about them, and have warned them not to discuss their UFO experiences or dire consequences will result. One of the first encounters with the Men in Black occurred in 1956, when a former U.S. Army clerk by the name of Albert K. Bender encountered them in a dark, supernatural form. It was Bender's encounter that led to the author Gray Barker to pen the 1956 book They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Bender described his sinister visitors as ghoulish characters with shining eyes that seemed to be dark, malevolent spirits that appeared in his bedroom at the dead of night and hovered over his bed. They told him that they would abduct humans and use them to disguise their true form, and warned him to keep his mouth shut about UFOs. In 1952, Bender established a popular publication called Space Review and founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau. In 1953, Bender claimed that he had made a number of important discoveries concerning UFOs, and that he had arrived at a comprehensive understanding of what the UFO phenomenon on Earth, why they were here, what they wanted, where they came from, and so on. However, Bender's encounter with these terrifying figures prompted him to shut down his organization and divest himself from any further involvement in UFO research. 6 years later, Bender came briefly out of UFO retirement to publish his own book on the disturbing affair entitled Flying Saucers and the Three Men. After the book was published, Bender left UFO research for good. He later claimed in the book that his three visitors were not only dressed identically in black suits, ties, gloves, shoes, and white shirts, but their eyes glowed, and they were surrounded by a blue glow that smelled strongly of sulfur. Perhaps most telling was Albert Bender's fascination with the occult. He had transformed his attic into a so-called chamber of horrors that was filled with paintings of demons, black cats, skeletons, vampires, and bats. He even had an altar of sorts, which he claimed to have summoned spirits from time to time. Indeed, Bender had a deep interest in the world of the paranormal, UFOs, and the occult in both fact and fiction. The link between UFO witnesses, abductees, and the occult is a recurring theme that we shall examine later. One of the most recent and compelling accounts concerning the Men in Black occurred in the spring of 2009 at the Sheraton Hotel on the banks of Niagara Falls, New York. On October 14, 2008, the general manager, along with the hotel security guard, had witnessed a triangle-shaped UFO flying slowly and silently over the hotel. The craft emitted a beam of bright white light directed downward towards the water. As they observed the craft, the light beam shifted direction and aimed directly at the two witnesses, which frightened them. 1 week later, the hotel manager observed another black triangle, but smaller than the first, flying directly over the hotel parking lot at around 1 o'clock in the morning. On May 15, 2009, two tall, identically dressed men walked into the hotel and asked to see the general manager. The hotel bellman told the two extremely odd-looking men that the manager was not working that day. The two men appeared not to believe him and began walking around the hotel, looking for the manager. One female employee later stated that the odd appearance of the two men made her feel very uncomfortable, and she recalled that the two began to speak of things that made no sense to her regarding governments and conspiracies. She became very frightened and noticed that the visitors had no facial hair, no eyebrows, and possessed large blue, hypnotic-looking eyes that did not blink. They also appeared to be wearing wigs that were attached to their hats. She even felt that they could read her mind. This sensation was so strong she tried not to think about the manager when in the presence of the two men. In fact, the hotel's CCTV security cameras actually caught the two men entering and leaving the building, as we can see here. So who are these mysterious men in black? It is likely that at least some of these enigmatic figures are members of a government or military agency that make it their business to investigate UFO sightings and closely question eyewitnesses, and sometimes even intimidate them into silence. In his book, The UFO Silencers, Timothy Beckley has attempted to provide an overview of important representative men in black encounters. Beckley speculates that the men in black have been with us for many hundreds of years, and that such diverse characters from the history of witchcraft and folklore, such as the Elizabethan black men, the Native American black men, and late 19th century reports of malevolent traveling salesmen, may have been manifestations of what we now know as men in black. Perhaps the most knowledgeable investigator in this field is author and researcher Nick Redfern, originally from the United Kingdom and now resident in Dallas, Texas. In his book, Men in Black, Personal Stories and Eerie Encounters, Redfern includes many personal encounters with men in black from people who have contacted him over many years. Some of the testimonials are bizarre and unsettling, leaving little doubt that for the most part, the men in black should be avoided at all costs, if possible. Throughout UFO history, human contactees have been told different things by the aliens concerning their origins. In medieval times, the crew of the ships observed sailing through the clouds stated that they were from a land in the sky called Magonia, while the crew members of the mystery airships that appeared in the late 19th century told their human observers that they were from another continent. In the 1950s, the so-called Nordics told George Adamski and others that they were from Venus or Mars. But we now know that these claims are false. However, Betty Hill was told by her captors that they came from the Zeta Reticuli star system, which is simply too far away for our scientists to confirm. In every case, the aliens, or whatever they are, appear to be deliberately deceptive concerning their origins and purpose. In his groundbreaking book, Passport to Magonia, published in 1969, French computer scientist and UFO expert Jacques Vallée speculated that the beings that masquerade as aliens may in fact be interdimensional rather than extraterrestrial, and that their appearance throughout history has been deliberately planned to fit with the cultural and religious perceptions of the different time periods in our history. But we will examine this intriguing theory in the next presentation. Until then, our advice to you is simply to watch the skies and beware of the men in black.